This is the bonus content for Volume 2, Issue 2 of Science of Rowing, coming to you in February of 2021. I'm Will Ruth, and I reviewed a study this month on coaching Masters athletes, and who better to talk to for applying this information to the Masters rower audience than longtime Masters coach Marlene Royle. Marlene, thanks so much for joining us. Please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your rowing and coaching.
Hi, Will. Well, I'm happy to be here, and thank you for having me on the talk to talk about Masters rowing, because obviously my passion is Masters rowing, and I started coaching Masters back in 1982 when there were almost no coaching of Masters. Masters rowing was almost non-existent at that point in time, but I started at a program in Boston that was run by Boston University, which was a Learn to Row program. And it was specifically for adults. And at that time, in 1982 in Boston, it was the only place where you could learn how to row. There were no Learn to Row programs. And all of the rowing clubs at that point were only for experienced people. And nobody was going to ever teach you even how to row a single. There were even no recreational singles back in those days. You know, it doesn't seem that long ago, but you know, this was the day before recreational boats and a lot of community rowing, which came later on, say after the mid 80s. So I was a competitive rower at Boston University, and I also rowed in high school. So this was my first coaching job. After my first year at university. And I realized immediately that I liked working with adults. That was just like, that was going to be my thing. I was not very oriented to be a juniors coach or a collegiate coach. Reasons we'll maybe discuss in our today. But it was definitely something that I felt, you know, and most of these people were much older than me. You know, I was 20 years old, 19 years old at this point, but I really liked working with adults. And so I kind of decided at that point that that was going to be my own focus. And then after, at the end of university, I started single sculling. And I was like, oh, this is it for me too. You know, bye-bye sweep, you know, sculling is my thing. You know, I've rowed in an 8 now, maybe once or twice in 35 years. So then it became, I want to coach adults and I want to coach sculling, particularly singles. So I was a competitive sculler for many years after university, but one thing led to another, and soon I was at Craftsbury in 1986. So that was my original place where I could coach adults and I could coach single sculling. And the program was small in those days compared to now, but we did have a very, very high percentage of adult masters rowers right from the beginning. And I kind of went from there. You know, I really haven't turned back as far as coaching sculling a lot. I do coach some sweep on occasion, but mostly coaching masters and coaching sculling. So I would say when I went back to elite training, because I retired for a while after university, and I actually went back in my early 30s. So I went back to elite training when I was 33 years old because the lightweight double had been added to the Olympic lineup. And I wanted to give it another shot because in my earlier days, it wasn't part of the Olympic lineup. So technically as a master's athlete, I went back and I trained full time until I was 39 years old. And I think that was a really formative time for coaching as well, because I was coaching as well as I was being coached at that time. So I was a technical master's being coached on an elite level and coaching masters myself. So I think that period of time was a big time of gaining a lot of experience about learning and being coached as an older athlete, plus then communicating things that took me 20 years to learn, like the release timing, that you could start communicating that to people in 2 or 3 sessions, right? Instead of it taking 20 years to problem solve. So that was quite a big influence, I think, on my whole approach to coaching. masters and being on the learning end as well as on the teaching end of things. And during that time as an elite athlete was when I started my Royal Road training programs as an athlete fundraiser. So because people were saying, oh, can't you just write down a few workouts
Sure.
and this? And I was like, well, no, we can't. No, we can't do that. I'm an occupational therapist by education. So look, I need to know something about you. We need to do some evaluations. We need to, let's look at the whole picture. And that was really how I merged into becoming an online coach in 1999, which I have continued to do to this day. And then 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, along with Rebecca Caro, we started a program called Faster Masters, which is also an online membership program. It's a little bit different, but we've continued to focus on masters.
That's fascinating. Have you start your experience coaching with masters athletes? Because that's one of the things that I wrote about in my review and in this study as well, is that there are differences, and those who don't have experience with masters athletes often just try to transfer their approach with younger athletes, or their approach that they took as an athlete. And until you have the experience with masters athletes, you don't necessarily know what you don't know,
right,
as
exactly.
far as what those differences are. So I want to give a little bit of introduction about the study that I reviewed just to set up this discussion. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about not so much on the technical and the training side of things, but more on the psychological and social elements of coaching masters rowers in this. So in the study that I reviewed, they had 561 masters athletes from a bunch of different individual sports. So running, swimming, track and field. They also had rowers in the sample as well. And they completed surveys so that researchers could understand the difference or the influence of the amount of coaching on satisfying or frustrating psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So it's important to note that the researchers just evaluated amount of coaching that they received, not the specific actions by the coaches, and then the effect of that on need satisfaction and need frustration, not looking at the performance improvement of the athletes or the retention of the program or other factors. But we could generally expect that if we have greater psychological need satisfaction and lower psychological need frustration, that we'll have overall better sport outcomes. So briefly, the researchers found that the coached athletes reported greater relatedness satisfaction than athletes receiving some or almost no coaching, but also greater levels of autonomy frustration than athletes who were receiving less coaching. So that's like the big sweeping summary review. You can read the full text of the study for free on coachingmastersathletes.com, which is a great website all about masters sport research. Or you can read my review of the study and the key takeaways in the February issue of Science of Rowing. So again, we're going to focus today on Marlene and your experience as a longtime coach of masters rowers of all ages, types, and levels, and also talk about some tips for self-coached athletes and coaches for masters rowers, drawing on the key themes and the takeaways of this research article. So first, I'd like to hear if there was anything in the article that surprised you, or if you have one big kind of takeaway from the article or from my review.
One thing that surprised me was that there was no difference between for people at different competitive levels, that there, or coached or non-coached, that there was no difference in their sense of competence as related to coaching. I thought that was very interesting, because my first thing is I would think that, well, receiving coaching would make you feel more competent in what you're doing, but that actually wasn't the case at all. And I thought that was very interesting.
Just that our mere presence does not inherently make athletes feel more competent.
Yeah, exactly. And for people like here, the definition of competence was the master's athlete's sense of mastery. How much control do you have over this? How well do you think you're doing what you're doing? So it's a lot of self-perception for sure. But I think that was definitely the most surprising thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to throw out a couple more definitions here for folks, the big themes of the research were autonomy, or feeling like sport participation is voluntary and to some extent self-directed. Competence, which, as you said, is feeling like one is capable and effective in the sport environment. So there's some task mastery components. There's some just general self-confidence in that training environment as well as the racing environment, and then relatedness, or feeling a sense of belonging as an athlete, like you are included, like you belong in the social environment of training. And the big idea is that coaches can directly affect this through our interactions with the athletes. We can also indirectly affect this through the kind of environment that we construct as the overall sport training experience. So what I want to do is roll through each of these with your advice or takeaways for both coaches of Masters rowers, as well as how we can better serve athletes that we coach, and for self-coached Masters rowers, including, thanks to present circumstances, those who are maybe new to self-coaching since the pandemic. So we'll start with autonomy, which is kind of a double-edged sword. The Masters athletes reported, or the coached Masters athletes reported, more autonomy frustration than the less coached athletes. So something about the coaching that they received was preventing them from feeling fully voluntary and self-directed in their training. Coaching provides structure and accountability, which people typically like, but too much structure or an overbearing amount of accountability can also constrain an athlete's feeling of control over their sport environment. So how can coaches of Masters athletes provide structure and encourage accountability and consistency without treading over the line and being overbearing for the athlete?
I think it depends a lot who you're working with. And certainly here, the term Masters athlete is, I mean, it's to some degree, it's a catch-all, right? Mm-hmm. Because the things that are going on in people's lives in their 30s and 40s are quite different from people in their 50s and say early 60s versus people after retirement age. Mm-hmm. So I think as things go forward in time, we'll start looking at different segments of Masters rowing rather than it being this a big term, because right now, it's covering, 50 years of your lifespan, right? It's a lot. But definitely, I think from a coaching point of view, first of all, you have to look at what is your coaching situation. Are you in a club situation and you have a very mixed group of people? This is a huge issue, I think, in clubs, that and we see it all the time. You've got a group that they all love rowing. Okay, so they've got this in common. They've got their sense of competence and mastery. It's all in common, right? Because this doesn't have anything to do, according to the study, with how much coaching they receive. Right. I think where you do see the differences is the amount of coaching that people want, or not necessarily, you could say not necessarily want, but can actually process. Mm-hmm. Some people can process a lot of coaching because they come from high school rowing and college rowing, and they're used to a coach being with them every day. They're used to processing coaching as they're rowing. People who maybe come to the sport later, they don't like that. Like, stop and talk to me, and then we'll start rowing again. Mm-hmm. And there are different coaches who actually approach, even on the elite level, this different, many coaches will actually tell the athletes what to do, let them row. When they stop, take a break, turn around, then they talk about it, and then they let them row, but they don't interrupt them while they're rowing. So if you look at different, you have this mixed group in your club, and now maybe some athletes are purely interested in fitness. Some athletes want to be competitive. This is an extremely common thing that creates tensions in a club situation. So this is where the coach's job becomes quite complex, because you have to decide, do you run two different practices for the people with two different goals? Because if it's fitness oriented, the people who want to get ready to race, regardless of what level they're at, that they just have this goal to do this, they're going to get frustrated if things are run more at a fitness level, whereas the people who are more recreational will get frustrated if the demands for the accountability are too high and I have to do this erg test and I don't want to do this erg test. I just want to row and enjoy being out in nature, right? So this is very common. And I think you have to talk to people, and you have to, with individuals, it's a little bit easier because you can ask them, that's rule number one, ask them, how do you like to be coached? How do you learn? Do you like to see me demonstrate something? Do you want to hear it? Do you want me to write it down? There's so I think first you have to find out, how they like to learn. And, there are people who will tell you, I want you to write everything down, and I want to tell you when my erg test is, and I want a logbook. And that's the way I like to do it. I don't want to think about this because, they're running companies, they're running families. They've hired you to do the thinking for them. And if there's an issue, they'll ask you to adjust it. So there are those people who, this is their time off, right? Like maybe they're training hard, but they want you to do the thinking and the planning, and they're really happy to execute the plan. They're actually the easy people to work with, to be honest with you, because they do exactly what you ask them to. There are other people who they just tell you, listen, I don't know my schedule. It's really difficult. I would like to do a 20-minute test once a month, but I can't plan exactly when that can be. And, my schedule's changing. So in that case, you have to say, well, I'd like you to do this by this day. Okay. Give them the choice of a day that they can pick when they're more rested, when they have more time, when they're more focused. Give them a schedule that tells them these are the most important workouts of the week. These are your 3 key workouts or your 2 key workouts. So if you have to rearrange your schedule, make sure that you get these done. And so that gives them the ability to be accountable, but at the same time, it's okay to move stuff around, life happens. And especially with masters, that's an issue. I think with the bigger group, it's a little more complicated if you've got groups with 2 different goals, but I still think you have to take the same approach and ask them and try to match groups that are alike as much as possible. And then for other reasons, which we'll talk about later, have the groups mix.
Okay, well, I'll be interested to hear more about that when we get to it then.
I know.
So you touched on it a little bit, but self-coached masters athletes can sometimes have too much autonomy when everything is up to them. So if you're not receiving coaching, then it's up to you when you train, whether you do strength training or whether you go for a row or whether you do cross training, how you do it, what zone am I going to train in. There's a lot of choices, and the phrase that typically gets thrown around is like decision fatigue, where
Yes.
okay, I have to manage all of this, and also as a master's athlete, if you're an employee or a boss or a manager, or you have a family, and there's a lot of choices that really pile up. So what advice do you have for self-coached rowers for kind of managing an excess of autonomy?
I definitely believe that you should have some type of program, because exercise is not training. So I think you have to decide, are you rowing for exercise or are you rowing for training? And by training, I mean that you have some specific personal goal. That does not necessarily mean competition. It could include competition, but it might be, I want to row a dam to dam in Boston. The dam to dam is, a 16-mile row. That's my goal. My goal is to get to that, right? Or I want to row the head of the Charles.
Mm-hmm.
They just want to be part of the event. But that's what differentiates exercise from training. So I think if you're self-coached and you're just doing it for enjoyment and exercise, you're not going to have that decision fatigue, because you base what you do every day on how you feel and how much time you have.
Any time is good time, basically.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter, but if you do have a goal, you've got to think about how things work together.
Mm-hmm.
And managing intensity is a huge issue, because if you're loading up your high intensity on top of your strength and you're not sleeping enough and you're changing your volumes too quickly and you're doing these things, you're going to end up injured. And then you're out of the game altogether. So I do think that putting together a training program, some people like the exercise, and those self-coached people, they want to read the books and research it and come up, that's part of what they love doing. If you're into that, that's fine. It takes a lot of time. It definitely takes a lot of time to get all that background. And but some people do it and they're successful at it. Most people don't have the time to invest in that, and that's why they go to a coach or to a program that is developed that gives them a structure where they can say, I've got confidence that this was designed by somebody who knows what they're doing. And I may not do it perfectly, but it gives a good structure that you can work off of that shows the balance of rest and work and changing intensities as you move through different phases of your strength program or your aerobic program working towards it. So some people don't even realize the value of a program when they don't have a program. And that might be one thing to say, well, you think you're doing okay, but maybe try some program. Maybe you even find a free program somewhere. There's lots of options out there. But try a program and then see how you feel after a month or two. Because the experience that I've had is that people will say, wow, I don't feel like I'm working as hard as I did before, but I'm going much faster. I'm like, well, let's, because, there is the rule of diminishing return. And a lot of times when people are self-coached, they are simply doing too much work for what their body is getting out of it, because they're not allowing the recovery time, which gives the compensation.
And I think especially true in a sport like rowing, it kind of attracts the high drive workaholic personality anyway.
I mean, rowing, half of my job as a coach in rowing is slowing people down. Honestly, no, you've got to do this at the right pace. Just trust us that you've got to do it at this pace. You'll get to go fast afterwards. In this workout, go fast. And this workout is not for trying to go faster. And so educating people so they understand what's the purpose of what they're doing. Like when I worked in the clinic, we call this, patient compliance, right? You explain, this is why you move your finger holding it right here. And this is what it's doing to, rehab your finger injury. If you explain to masters athletes why they are doing something, one, I think they appreciate it a lot because they may not know. And two, they're much more likely to do the workout with the correct intention.
Yeah. And to your point, I think so much of that starts with an athlete-centered goal setting conversation. That if you're coming to somebody with a training approach and zones and performance and targets, but they're on the exercising value spectrum, then that's going to be a disconnect. And I think that especially going from like a clinic PT, OT kind of setting where it's like, well, you have to do this if you want to regain hand function. We don't really have like that same need in rowing. So really have to start with like the conversation of what's important to you in this situation and right now too, because people can change over time and based on what's going on in the rest of their life. And then, okay, here's the methods we're using that align with that goal. And here's why it all kind of comes together.
Yeah. And things do change. And that's one thing is being a coach for masters athletes, particularly if you're working with somebody for a long period of time, things are changing all the time. Women have children, people have grandchildren, people retire, people get new jobs, they move. And their goals change. Some years someone may say to me, my focus is I want to maintain my fitness, but I know I'm going to have a really busy year this year. So I may not put competition as my top goal. So I want to use this year to, and this year is very similar to that actually right now. I want to use this year to maintain really good fitness, and I want to learn to do this in my single. And so a training plan can be a technical plan too. So you can adjust that, but that's definitely, that flexibility is really key, because the plan won't work if the athlete's goals are not the same as you can't impose, a coach cannot impose their goals on the athlete. It's not going to work. And
I think that's when we see that psychological need
yes,
frustration, is somebody else is
absolutely.
taking my values or my goals from
Yes,
me and determining them.
right. Or someone rows on a team and they say Masters Nationals, our entire life is focused on Masters Nationals this year. And maybe for half the boat it is, but maybe for half the boat it's not. So, that's going to create, a discord in the team. So, it becomes, I think, very tricky for coaches in a team situation to balance those things unless there is a clear delineation that this is a competitive program and these are the expectations. And if this does not align with your goals, please don't join this program, join this program. So, clubs, if they can, have to offer a couple different types of programs for adult athletes.
Yeah. And I think the ability to sort of change or self-select, at least sometimes, not necessarily every day or every week, of course, but I definitely sort of fell into the idea that, like, there's Masters athletes who are here for the social benefit and the exercise and the outdoors. And
Absolutely.
then over here on a polarity, here's Masters athletes who are interested in the competition and the training. And the reality is there's more blur there, and there's more crossover.
And that's why people like to go to camps, groups go to camps together, or they go on rowing tours together. I mean, there's the people who love that social side of it. And, and they like rowers as people. So they want to be around rowers as people.
Yeah. Even when you're competitive, you still want the social and recreational exercise.
Oh, absolutely. It's huge. It's huge, actually.
Yeah.
It's huge.
So that brings us well into competence. And as we noted, the researchers did not find overall a relationship between level of athlete and amount of coaching received, or any relationship between amount of coaching received and the satisfaction or frustration around competence. So big takeaway is that athletes can achieve success with coaching or self-coaching. And as I said earlier, simply being coached does not necessarily make an athlete feel more competent. So obviously we've got to get into the methods of this. And I wrote about the challenge of helping Masters rowers recognize increasing competence, because with age-related losses in performance, it's hard to just use erg times the way that we might with younger rowers who are age-wise on the up and up.
Right.
And even with age class racing, not all Masters rowers want to race, so we can't just rely on that either. And then, of course, I thought about our challenges at Craftsbury with group video sessions, because we do, okay, let's focus on technique and skill mastery. But then how many rowers really do not want their technique publicly evaluated, even if it's praise? Because people just get very self-conscious about it. So what are some ways that you help Masters rowers feel more competent?
I think you have to look at both, of course, subjective answers and objective data. And, yes, people's times change and things like that. On the water, fortunately, in our sport, times are never all that reliable. Sure. So that actually takes a big pressure off masters athletes, because, your times can vary so much over 1,000 meters or 2,000 meters based on wind, right? Yeah. So from that point of view, it's easier to frame things on the water. Well, how did you do in your event? Because you're rowing against people the same age as you. So that's already a benefit. How you can focus. I tend to focus a lot more on them. How did you execute your race plan? Sure. How did you row technically? What was the quality of your race? And, and I have people send me back recaps of their races. And I've read recaps of the Head of the Charles that are 5 pages long. Okay. So we're talking about somebody who, and, these are winners. Mm-hmm. So they're somebody who takes their performance at whatever age group extremely seriously, and they know their competitors, and they know them because they race. When you're racing in your age group, you race the same, similar people over and over again, right? So they get to know their habits, and when they can overtake them, and they know what to look for in their competitors. So you have to, I think you have to focus on, how well did you execute what you wanted to do? Keep it in the moment. Like, what could you do on this particular day? And do you feel that you did that the best that you could? And I will also ask people, evaluate your 24 hours leading up to your race. And I ask them to write to me 10 things that you did really well and 10 things that you want to improve on for the next time you have an event or performance. So that could include everything. That includes eating. That includes, not talking on the phone 5 minutes before you launch your boat and you forget your bow number. So I think you bring it into the whole picture of all the things that are required to row a good race. It isn't just the training. If you put your oarlock backwards and you don't notice that until you're at the start and you have to go over to the BU dock and fix your oarlock and then rush back over, that's a blip, right? So,
yeah.
I was going to say, getting them to focus on those types of experiences. And just as a last note, if you stay in shape, my informal experience, I have 20 years of data on masters erg scores. And for the people who consistently train and consistently maintain their fitness, they can actually maintain their erg scores fairly closely with minimal drops for quite some time. I mean, through their late 50s and 60s, if you stay in shape, you can keep it really close. Minimal variances, right? Where you do start to see the differences are after 70. That's where you'll start to see dropped 5 or 10 seconds or something like that. But again, we still focus on the quality, and that's why people do time trials at home so they know where they are at that particular time. And
yeah, but I think it's interesting to note the carryover between competence and autonomy there, because the whole idea of like you're asking them for the reflection on the race is teaching them to be reflective about what they did and the process of doing it, and then also what happened. So I think that's one key idea for increasing competence and also autonomy, is helping people recognize how many inputs they have control of that all factor into performance and satisfaction. Those are really great generalizable lessons to learn as well.
Absolutely. Like if somebody says, oh, it went really well, I'll be, well, what went well? Like that's not an answer for me, right?
Somewhere between that and 5 pages is a sweet spot.
If it went well, will you please tell me
yeah.
what did you do well? Oh, I had a really good night's sleep. Okay, what else? Oh, I had my favorite dinner, or I saw my friend and I was really happy. I was really happy to be there. Just being happy to be there sometimes helps you have a great race. But for people who are not used to expressing details, sometimes you have to help them develop that skill. Well, it's like in sports psychology, your performer self, right? You have to become that performer self when you step into your boat. So who do you want to be when you step into that boat, and how do you practice those things to be this person on demand? That's what elite athletes are doing. When they put their foot in the boat, they're in the office. It doesn't matter that you didn't pay your credit card bill on time, right? Once you're in the boat, you're in the boat. So you do have to teach competitors those skills sometimes, like just leave it on shore. You'll be back in 90 minutes. You can take care of it then. But
and helping people learn and recognize the benefits of doing those things is part of that educational process too.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a lot there that a self-coached athlete could take and put into practice. But is there anything else on competency that you would recommend for self-coached masters rowers?
I think for self-coached people, it's very important to keep a logbook and to write things down. And again, the level of detail of that could be very broad, depends what you like, but it is important to keep a record of some things so that, for example, if you start to say, oh, I'm not feeling that well, or gee, I just don't feel good in the boat, that you have some ability to look back and say, oh yeah, well, it's been 10 days that I haven't taken a rest day. So, paying attention to what you're doing. I think you can video yourself or have people video you, because if you're not working with a coach, you may not be getting regular feedback on the water, and technical improvements are going to make you faster and take a lot less energy. So doing things like reviewing your own video, looking at your own video, and then looking at, online resources of, maybe some coaches or athletes who you really like. I think most self-coached masters rowers are students of the sport anyway. So, they sit a lot on YouTube, they read a lot of things online. So, there's rarely, I think, a self-coached competitive masters who just gets in the boat and rows. I think they're very interested in a lot of things. So you can,
even before the internet era, they could have been buying
oh yeah, oh
books
they
and
were,
stuff.
oh
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely, and they
yeah.
were,
And
and they
because you
were,
were writing those books.
you know, yeah, I mean, so they are trying to learn, and that's why those such self-coached people often go to camps, because they're training in isolation, and the camps offer them some maybe new information. It offers them the ability to talk to other rowers at other places who have different experience. It lets them try some new equipment. I don't know, do I want to buy those oars? Well, I'd rather try them first, stuff like that. So self-coached athletes do need ways to check in with themselves. And I think logbooks and, I advise everyone, buy a tripod, have your own personal tripod and set it up so that when you're erging or doing an erg test or whatever you're doing, get a little bit of footage and look at it afterwards and just see where you think you can make improvements.
Instead of having to crane your neck around to look at the mirror or something, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Just get a little tripod and set it up, and just let it record during one piece, and then look at it on a regular basis. When I was racing in my master's elite level racing period of life, my husband always videoed the last 250 meters of any race. And then we would go right back to the hotel and look at it. And if it was like between heats and semifinals or repechage, we would go right back, look at the video, boom, get ready, go right back out and race, get the last 250. And we were doing that all the time.
Yeah, so you really develop some good self-awareness and data over time with that approach too, not just like
Yes,
a one-off.
exactly.
Let's look at this and be done.
Right, especially when you don't have a personal coach. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So on to relatedness then. This was the biggest finding, and the researchers proposed that the greatest opportunity for coaches of individual sports, masters rowers included, is increasing relatedness and helping athletes feel more connected to the athletic identity, the sport, the training, and to some extent the coach themselves. So you and I have talked about how, as a surprisingly small portion of our total coaching time is actual program writing, even mm-hmm. when we're coaching athletes online. All of the other stuff like emailing and talking with athletes and getting to know them as people as well still is very much part of coaching. And this research, as well as some other articles by the same group of authors, shows that this is especially important to masters athletes. So does that all hold up in your experience, and what advices do you have for coaches of masters athletes here?
It holds up 100%, no doubt. I think like any business relationship, and a coach athlete relationship is a business relationship in one form. Though for many years we never thought about it that way, but coaching is a product. And if you are thinking about your product, you need to think about the delivery, the accessibility. Is there friction related to it? Is it a good value? Is, all the same things that you would consider for any product. And part of the product is the relationship. Absolutely. And why do you buy the same brand of car your entire life? Because you like the relationship with that company. Not just the car itself, but you like their service, you like, et cetera, et cetera. And I think in a coaching relationship, you have to have, I think for it to be successful, you have to have a level of respect. You have to have, I think the coach has to show commitment. I think people care a lot about commitment from a coach, and they are particularly sensitive to whether they feel like the coach cares about them or whether they're important enough. And this can definitely become this sense of belonging where we were talking about, here's a program where you've got a really competitive group of people. Maybe you've got a four, and this group of women or men, they've rowed together. That's the four. Nobody else can row in that boat, right? They've rowed for 15 years together. And then there's everybody else. Things like that can create dissension in programs, or you've got the experience like, oh, they're the really good rowers and I'm the novice and I don't know anything, and oh, it's us and them, even though they're all masters, right? But they're different. But so the sense of belonging can really be developed in a club when these groups of people mix. And there are clubs that are very sensitive to this, because there's a huge difference between somebody who rowed in high school and college and then continues rowing as a competitive masters athlete versus somebody who's never done sports in their life and learns to row when they're 55 years old.
Which is part of the great thing about rowing.
Yeah.
And yet it also makes it complicated.
Yes, it makes it complicated, but it's an absolutely unique thing. Like, I mean, most of the people who have learned to row in my town at my new little club, they're all over 50, right? Or some of them are over 60 and they're like, and even over 70, and they're like, wow, this is a whole new world, And
it might be their first athletic experience at all, let alone their first rowing experience too.
Well, for probably a decent population, often it is, because rowing it is a way to do things parallel with other people when you're in the same boat. It's not like running together where one person is going to be faster than the other on the bike. But I do think that this sense of belonging, when you've got, there are people who know all the traditions and the etiquette of rowing. And then there are people who don't know anything about this. And where do they even learn about it, right? Not that easy to learn about that unless somebody says, don't talk in the boat, right? And then they don't know that that's a culture in rowing, right? They're just like, oh, that person told me not to talk. Sure. But I think that the clubs that run successful programs that look at different abilities, especially bringing in new people to row, they will often have a certain time of the year when 4 experienced people go in an 8 with 4 novice people. So first the novices, they do their learn to row program on their own, and then they start to mix them. And the experienced people, this is part of the club culture that they begin to improve their level by bringing them into the boats to row together. And that may not, competitive level could be something separate, but that's an important thing, I believe, in a master's program, is to connect the experience, the levels of experience, so that you don't have some people are up here and some people are down here. Yeah. As we've learned, everybody's sense of competency is the same, right? Or their enjoyment, everybody wants a sense of belonging. So yeah. That's where the coach can play a huge role in that atmosphere, creating
that's
that environment.
Both in the direct interactions as far as how the coach works with the athletes themselves, but also, as you're pointing out, in the indirect actions of how the coach creates those opportunities for cultural sharing or community sharing between the more experienced and the more novice populations.
And as you mentioned about something like a video session, mm-hmm. Where you have some people are extremely sensitive because they feel vulnerable. Who doesn't? Mm-hmm. I mean, it doesn't matter how many years you row, you always have something to improve. Yeah. So, for example, at Craftsbury, I was thinking about this because it's one, I think, because the video component is a very, very big part of the program, the types of coaches that you have working in your program is the selection of those coaches is very, very important, because you have to have coaches who know how to work well in this environment. Okay. And that's certainly one of the big considerations of who is coaching in that particular program. If you look at the video session, the way we do it now, it's not only the athlete who's on the stage, the coach is on the stage too, right? Because the way we do it is we work in small groups, and then we go into the video together. We may be in 2 rooms or 1 room, but with, say, 3 groups, I review my 5 rowers from my group. You review your 5 scullers, but you're also doing a review in front of me. I'm doing a review in front of that guy who was an Olympic team coach for 25 years. And this person who's a first-year coach is doing reviews in front of us. So, it's not just the rowers who are under a little bit of, feeling vulnerable, I would say. And I think the important thing is, again, creating that environment that this is we're all here to learn. And I did feel that taking whatever your topic would, if say you were working on one particular element, the crossover in your group, I like using that as, well, let's check this on the video. This is what we were working on. And you don't need to get into a whole, maybe there are 20 other things that could be improved, but we don't need to go into that in this situation. We can do that on a private level, right? So I think that's a good approach. I think always letting somebody decide. If somebody really comes to you and says, I really don't want my video shown, don't show it. Just skip it, or do it afterwards. That doesn't happen as often as you might think, but it does once in a while, and that's okay. I think just, there's no reason to push it.
And I think what you just said, again, kind of comes back to like the athlete-centered experience of, if you've talked to them before we go on the water and you say, what are you working on today? And you have that one thing that they're already sort of motivated to address. Then in the film session, you tie that back again to, hey, okay, let's just look at this. Then I think that is really helping build the athlete's competence of, instead of turning it into a 5-minute roast of their technique, or the coach showing off about how much they know about whatever.
And that can happen in situations. I think I think at Craftsbury, it's taken many years of refinement, but we've moved away from that quite a bit. But it can happen in in other situations. And
but you're tying it back into the autonomy of, what are you working on, the competence of, let's focus on that, and then the relatedness of, hey, there's some trust established between the coach and the athlete, to where they're not going to stand up there and rake me over the coals for 5 minutes, but they're going to perform some building me up, critical evaluation, as well as, here's what you're going to do in your next session to be helpful.
Yes, and I think asking them, did you feel, I think one of the important things, at least for me, coaching on the water, is I just tell people, I don't expect you to be able to make these corrections right now. I don't even expect you to master this during the camp. My goal is to give you the way to work on it, so that when you go home, you know how to practice this, and you've got some really concrete reference points and tips that you can practice this and self-evaluate. So you've got to give them ways to self-evaluate. You can't just keep it warm and fuzzy. Like that's just not going to work for most people. You have to tell them, when your hands are at this position, this is what you want to check. You want to make sure that your right knuckle touches your left palm. They can do that. And if they do that, you know what? They're in the right position. So you have to, I think, give them things they can take home, because then they're going to be self-coaching, many of them. So you have to bridge that.
A real key for masters athletes too, versus younger athletes, is by the time you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s and beyond, you've developed the context and the experience to be able to self-coached to some extent on other things. So, hey,
Mm-hmm.
how can I take those skills and now apply this to rowing? Whereas with a younger athlete who doesn't necessarily have that experience yet to be able to contextualize and adequately self-coach, then you might be a little bit more directive and
Right.
instructive.
Absolutely.
So this ties in well with faster masters. The other side of the relatedness issue was that less coached athletes reported lower relatedness satisfaction and greater relatedness frustration than
Mm-hmm.
coached athletes. So what are some ways, we've talked about a few already with camps and stuff, but what are some other ways that self-coached masters rowers can meet that relatedness need outside of maybe receiving coaching?
Well, I think if they, like, for example, a model like the Faster Masters, which is also a model, like a triathlon has it, running has it, where it is a kind of a membership type of a program, um, has a little bit of a different function because yes, okay, maybe we're not working on you one-on-one, but you're getting educational materials every month and you're getting a choice of one or two different programs depending on your goals. So it gives the athlete who doesn't have any coaching at all or program, it already gives them a structure. And we tell people like, well, this is how you can rearrange things. These are, like we were talking, these are the important things that you need to do each week. These are the things that you can move around, and this is how you do it. And there's a method of support and getting questions. Like we don't say, okay, send us your race recap or things like that, but if you had a question, you can send it in and you've got like two real people who are going to answer you,
Yeah, there's
it's
some
not.
social component there,
Yes,
and they see you on
absolutely.
the podcast, and there's a little bit
Right.
of the month to month relationship there.
Yeah. And things that are like, okay, we're going to have a Zoom question and answer session that people can join into, and
Mhm.
things like that. So, it's an in between where you've got a resource, like we all, for our lives, it's like, it's like you're for taxes, right? You want somebody that you can go ask advice. They don't need to be with you every single day,
Sure.
but when there's a question, should I do this or that? You want to go ask somebody and get advice that you trust. And I
Yeah.
would say,
Trusted resource, not just open Google searching.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, and these people are already taking a lot of initiative because they've already got the bug, they've already got the passion to
Mhm.
row. They've just decided that, I need to take things a little bit to the next level, right? And there have been people who started with that program, and then one woman early on, she canceled, and we were like, we always ask them, like, why did you cancel? Or are there things we could do better? And she said, you know what? It made me realize how much I want to get back into real competitive rowing. And so even though our program is a competitive program, she decided to join a very competitive club team in her area. So,
Yeah,
that
so it's
helped
sort of
her.
the bridge between self-coached and fully
Yes.
coached. Yeah.
Yes. And she decided to go then. She said, gosh, I realized how much I miss this. And she was a very successful college rower, but now in her 40s. And she said, I realized now I want to go into a really highly coached, structured program. So, it can work both ways. It can bring people up to a next level, or it can realize that, oh, you want to trampoline up to another level at the same time.
Sure. Yeah. I think the other things we talked about as far as meeting relatedness need is, having some sort of social community around this too, even if it's people who you only see at regattas or
Mm-hmm.
or visiting a camp. Are there other things like that you would recommend for the self-coached rower?
Well, there certainly are things like Facebook groups,
Sure.
like Masters Rowing International, which is, Rebecca and I actually started that group a long time ago, which it has over 10,000 members in it now. And I'm the most terrible Facebook user on the face of the earth too, but many people that, they really enjoy that. They belong to these groups, especially people who are perhaps training on their own. This is one of their large sources of information. Again, get support, ask a question, and 20 people send you like really cool answers, right? Even if it's like, what should I name my boat? Well, you're pretty cool that you've got a boat, and you know, you've got a boat you can name, right? So
Yep.
that's already like really cool for somebody. But I think definitely things where going to conferences. I mean,
Sure.
in person, obviously, I think rowers, they really like to meet each other, and that's one thing. Like virtual, I like virtual conferences because I'm so happy I can get the information, right? But I do miss, sitting and having a coffee with
Yeah.
somebody and just kind of, how are things going with you, or seeing people
Yeah.
who you haven't seen for a long time, um, but in-person things, I think for the club, masters love to row and go have breakfast together on Sunday
Mhm.
mornings. That's like a really big tradition all over the world with rowers, or if they row in the evening, if you live in Britain or Europe, you go up to the bar and you have a beer before you go home or something, so um, those are things people really really like, and that's one of the things in a club, I think, where you've got different levels of experience. You're all common when you're at the table having breakfast, and you get to know each other. And masters are usually really interesting people. They're professionals. They've learned how to do all kinds of stuff. They've traveled all over the world. They've done all sorts of interesting things. And that sense of belonging grows out of that social network, because it's not like, you have a better release than me and you can balance the boat better than I can,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. To the listener or viewer, we hope you enjoyed it and will want to learn more from us at scienceofrowing.com, as well as more from Marlene at fastermasters.com and royalrow.com. And also from the researchers behind this study at coachingmastersathletes.com. We've got some great resources to help with the masters rower crowd. Is there anything else that you want to add, or anywhere else that people should look for you to find you on the internet or in real life?
No, well, those are great resources. Also rowing magazine. I do have a regular training. That's more of a training column, which is not necessarily just a master's oriented column. It's a training column for all ages of rowers. But I think just encourage people to learn and enjoy the sport more, and for coaches to really focus on developing good environments and healthy relationships with your athletes, because your life is going to be much better for it too.